Russia announcing it launched cruise missiles targeting ISIS positions in Syria. Moscow saying 6 missiles were fired from their vessels in the Mediterranean Sea, claiming the strike destroyed command centers and ammunition stockpiles. Connor Powell, live from our Mideast Bureau with the very latest. Connor, do we take the Russians at their word on this one?
Well, it seems to be that there were strikes launched by Russia, and Russia is saying that before they launched these strikes against ISIS, which is their claim, it hasn't been independently verified yet, they gave both Israel and Turkey a heads up about these strikes. They did not, however, give the United States a heads up as they've done in the past. Now, Russia's latest show of force against ISIS comes as mounting tensions between Moscow and Washington after a U.S. jet shot down a Syrian plane that dropped bombs near American-backed rebels in Syria a few days ago. Russia and the Assad regime say that Syrian jet was targeting terrorists, which is sort of a catch-all phrase for anybody that the Assad regime views as an enemy there. Now, in response, Russia's military cut all communications with the Pentagon, and Russia said it would treat any U.S. jets west of the Euphrates as a potential target. The Assad regime really does continue to consolidate both victories and territory on the ground in Syria, and the United States, Russia, and the Assad regime are starting to bump up against each other as they battle not only for space but against ISIS, and it is becoming much more tense there and raises the real possibility for conflict. But one thing we're starting to see, Leland, is that as we move forward and the Assad regime really is starting to win on the ground, countries like France, French President Macron said yesterday, they see the priority needs to be on ISIS and not Assad leaving. That is very much the view of Russia and Iran. That's a big change from countries like the United States and Saudi Arabia, which wants Assad gone. A lot of changing dynamics right now on the ground. In large part, the United States is left out of sort of the future right now because the U.S. and Russia aren't talking.
Well, success defined in so many different ways. Connor Powell there in the Mideast Bureau. Connor, thank you.
breaking news, and that is Russia's defense ministry has vowed to shoot down any perceived threat in Syria. It follows a wave of claims in the foreign press that the White House is considering direct airstrikes on Syrian army positions. Let's now discuss this with RT's Daniel Hawkins, who joins me live from central Moscow. So, Daniel, tell us a bit more about this latest development.
It's quite a worrying and a serious development, Marina, I have to say. It follows a marked change in attitude from the Washington administration. John Kerry himself was actually in support of limited strikes against Assad back in 2013. He then switched to a more diplomatic outlook, and now it seems there has been yet another change of course. Washington, according to media sources at least, plans to hit Assad forces with strikes on the Syrian Air Force's airfields with cruise missiles and other long-range weapons. Now, this has understandably left the Russian Ministry of Defense quite concerned. They have personnel at the Khmeimim Air Base, the Tartus Naval Base, and indeed throughout Syria. Now, they've deployed a S-400 missile defense system. This is a defensive system designed to shoot down aerial targets such as cruise ballistic missiles and also airplanes and helicopters. Russia, of course, sees a grave threat to its personnel in these latest plans to target Assad's forces. And the Russian Ministry of Defense certainly didn't beat about the bush in warning of the consequences of such plans. Let's take a listen.
I would like to remind the American strategists that the air cover of the Russian bases in Khmeimim and Tartus is provided by the S-400 and S-300 anti-aircraft weapons systems, the strike radius of which may be a surprise to any unidentified flying objects. I should really acknowledge that the Russian anti-aircraft defenses won't likely have time to figure out through a direct line where the weapon's going or who it belongs to.
Well, this worrying development has taken place over the last 2 weeks following the collapse and then suspension of the bilateral talks on Syria between Russia and Washington. The French foreign minister, as we heard earlier, is in talks currently with the Russian foreign minister and will travel to Washington tomorrow to talk to his American counterpart. So it's hoped that not all hope is lost for some sort of de-escalation and dialogue here after what is a pretty worrying development in Syria.
Certainly, Daniel. We'll watching developments there. Thanks so much for bringing us up to speed on this story. Daniel Hawkins there. Well, a little earlier, the White House said it was well aware of any attacks on President Assad's forces would bring Russia and the U.S. closer to conflict.
There's a risk associated with taking strikes at regime targets. That risk includes attacking a regime that does continue to maintain a robust air defense system. It also edges U.S. and Russian military forces closer to confrontation. It doesn't serve anybody's interest.
The U.S. military saying it will now treat American aircraft as targets if they are found operating west of the river in Syria. Now, the heated rhetoric comes after a U.S. warplane shot down a Syrian government jet, making it clear that America is willing to challenge the Assad regime and its allies. Russia and Syria are both calling it a, quote, act of aggression. But the military says they were just trying to protect U.S.-backed fighters on the ground. Joining me with some insight into this story is former U.S. intelligence officer and underground movement CEO Jason Beardsley. Jason, good to have you back on the program. Is this some kind of proxy war that we're entering with Syria? With Russia over Syria?
Well, Trish, thanks for having me. Proxy war would be kind of where this goes if this was utter chaos. These are kind of deliberate steps in the process. So I think what this is really proxy negotiation. These are diplomats laying their cards out. This is the second test by Syria. You remember the chemical weapons test? You can look at that as a pass from the administration. We went in, we bombed their airfields. They've ratcheted this up one step beyond that to say, hey, are you willing to go this far in your investment? And the answer from the U.S., as you point out, is a firm resolve, and it's a yes, we're willing to defend our troops.
And we want al-Assad. Let's not forget what the end game is here. We want Assad gone, Jason. And President Trump has made that clear over and over again. But this is where we are at odds right now with Russia. So how does this play out? Is Putin getting a hint?
This is, that's the conflict. It's been an absolutist position for a while now, but if you watch these negotiations carefully, the Trump administration has looked like what it's created is we're looking for stability in the region first and foremost. Assad will become sort of secondary to that. Primary is the stabilization. Remember, we've got troops on the ground right now, so U.S. forces that are aligned with some of these Sunni coalition-led forces, and that's why we're protecting them. We're protecting them when we take the U.S. air power and we level it against Syrian air power. And again, that's firm resolve from the administration. But I don't think the long-term play is really first and foremost about Assad as much as it is about regional stability. This is about pleasing the Russians.
But how do you have regional stability with Assad there at the helm?
So that's a great question. This is about great powers sitting down at the table and coming up with a compromise that works. It's going to work for the Saudis,
Jason,
the Turks, the Iranians.
I hear you on this, and I get it. You want some stability in the region, but I keep going back to the fact that this is a man that we know has used chemical weapons on his own people. How do you keep him in power? Isn't this central to the whole idea of stability? You need him out.
This is difficult, but I will say this. What the U.S. has stated almost vociferously is the people and the president and both administrations, Obama administration, Trump administration, we are not ready to go to war to depose Bashar al-Assad. That's almost a clear statement. So the end game there is, if we are absolutists about that position, then we have to be willing to put our forces in conflict against Russia in this region. Russia has an investment in keeping its proxy state. Now, the compromise looks like, how do we protect the Kurds? How do we protect the Sunnis? How do we protect our investment in Iraq? And the way we protect those is by stabilizing the regions that we first and foremost have already bled for, sacrificed for, and fought for. We'll get to Assad down the road. That's a longer problem, but we are not going to be looking at a deposition of Assad anytime soon. And what's now happening is the generals, strategists, national security people are looking at what does a light balkanization of this area look like. We cannot be absolutists about these borders. That's starting to become more clear.
I look at Syria and I say, look, this is in part why you do have so many problems right now. This was allowed to happen. They crossed the line. We didn't do a darn thing about it, and it just seems like this is an opportunity for us to exert more influence. And I hear what you're saying, and we have to be careful with our resources. But this is one that we may find ourselves having to do a bit more on, rather than letting Vladimir Putin get the upper hand.
You're absolutely right. It's very tough, and you make a great point, which is we can't forget how we got here. This chaos is a direct result of our past disposition, which has been let it all fall apart. And now we're here in a tougher spot, so we need to heave and hoe together, get the diplomats and the national security people on board. There's some smart people behind this thing, and what we'll find at the end of this is a sort of a compromise in the middle.